Thank you everybody for joining us today with for this de-escalation skills and techniques webinar. I know it's something you have all been asking for. And just a quick reminder, we do have other resources that you can see on our website that will be a good complement after this presentation for you to bring back to your establishments. We're joined by George Giangi. He will be presenting today. He comes to us with over 30 years experience in the field of emergency management and is very familiar with workplace violence prevention and responses to these types of situations. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about some techniques and skills you could be thinking about, and we'll be available for questions at the end of the presentation, but please make sure to keep all your lines muted during the entire presentation and to use the chat feature and we will address all the questions at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm going to turn this over to you, George.
Thanks very much, Hope. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the South Central Pennsylvania Task Force, I want to extend our appreciation for allowing me to present on this topic. We will talk a little bit about de-escalation skills and techniques, especially as it pertains to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also touch on at the very end what you as a business should be looking at for civil unrest, putting together a plan and some procedures and hopefully some training for your employees to address both of these topics. So the overall message that I guess I want you to take away from this is not a legal dissertation. This is intended to give you some guidance as to what you go back and talk to your frontline employees, that what they do at the start of an incident is so crucial as to determine the outcome. So how they handle these situations is really going to be critical in terms of, does it escalate to some level of violence, or does it just go away? They understand, they comply, they know that your frontline workers are merely doing their job. Let's not take it out on him or her. So that's really the critical message. I hope to give you some takeaways, some nuggets for you to go back and really look at whether your planning and procedures and training are sufficient to prepare them for these types of events. So this is a workplace violence spectrum. Obviously, at the very far right, there's nothing mistaking the outcome of death. We hope we never have to ever get to that level. And at the very far left is the behaviors of concern, where we're going to really be spending most of our time. And this is not a linear progression. It's not that somebody shows a sign of behavior of concern and necessarily goes to a threatening behavior before getting to a real violent stage. What it does show is that depending on where they are in the spectrum, the incident can become extremely volatile, completely irrational, and it's hard for us or anyone to try, the rational person certainly, to try and make sense of behavior that is so irrational. So again, how you nip it in the bud early on is so critical to determine the outcome. And we're going to be focusing most of our attention on the very far left. What behaviors of concerns should your frontline workers be looking for, and how should they treat and respond to those types of behaviors? So some reporting options, obviously for lower level behaviors, allow your frontline worker to allow the person who's aggravated, and we'll talk a little bit about what might get them to be aggravated, allow that person to talk or just vent. In some cases, in most cases, the problem tends to go away. They kind of get back down to earth. Okay, it's not me against them. This person is just merely trying to implement government mandated policies, for example, or an establishment's policy. Ask your workers to try and document any details in the event that it ever escalates to some serious nature or serious event. I also like, for planning purposes, to have your establishment, have your employees have a code word or phrase that may alert other coworkers to summon help. It should be a code word or a phrase that's not part of the vernacular of your industry, but when they hear that word or phrase, you're discreetly letting them know, hey, things are going south. I need you to call help. call security or call a supervisor or even call police, however your plans and procedures state. So some behaviors of concerns, these are the obvious, intense bursts of anger, a clenched fist is certainly indicative that this person's really riled, intense staring, pushing, shoving, even throwing innocent articles. It may start off as just, wadding up a napkin and throwing it at somebody, and you think, okay, well, there's no harm in that, except that it can easily escalate to a volatile state. If a napkin is convenient and they throw that at you, would a glass or a bottle of beer, for example, be just as convenient? Would that be next? Would he or she take out a weapon and attack your employee with it? So minor nonviolent conflicts that can go unresolved, may end up going away, or they may not. So intervening early in that conflict is really so critical. And if they do go into that volatile, irrational state, there's no prediction in terms of where it's going to go next. So again, it's critically important that they keep that in mind. And also, I think just as a common sense, they should put themselves in their shoes. Be mindful of certain sensitivities. For example, generational, cultural, or racial differences may interpret your employees' words or actions differently than what it was intended to do. So again, it just I remember doing an assessment for a utility, and it was the concern was that they were backed up at the bill collection place at an electric utility company, and when you found out what was going on, it was a lot of the elderly people tended to go there and wanted to pay their bills with cash and wanted receipts for that payment. And they took the opportunity of that time to talk to the bill collector, the utility employee, about their grandchildren, about the fish they caught over the weekend, and just because it was just a great time to get out and talk to people. Consequently, it got backed up. People in the back of the line were complaining, hey, I've got to get to work type of thing. And so it turned out it really was a generational issue. That's what that kind of sensitivity was important. We put some of the utility workers, just as an exercise, smudged up non-prescription glasses with Vaseline, put some cotton in their ears, and just showed how sensitive it was, how important it was for to be in that position, not be able to see real good and not be able to hear real good, and recognize that there are some sensitivities you need to take into account. So again, that role reversal is certainly important in dealing with all kinds of, if you're dealing with a customer that may be an older customer, or obviously somebody that just came over from a foreign country, they have certain biases, they have certain interpretations to your body language, to how you address them, and that sort of thing. So keep that in mind in dealing with various customers. So how's 2020 been so far? Well, obviously I'm speaking to the choir here. With the COVID-19 issues, with self-isolation, quarantine, loss of life, we've had neighbors here who've lost grandparents dying in a retirement community, and certainly they couldn't even go through the funeral process with any dignity, limiting it to 10 people and that sort of thing. Loss of jobs, school closures, and the imposition that has on working families. We've had civil unrest, high unemployment rates, businesses that are permanently closed now. The racial tension has spiked, the George Floyd issue, the Antifa, and some others that we'll be addressing a little bit later. And to complicate matters, now you got the pro-maskers and the anti-maskers. Masks have certainly become politicized at this point. People wanting to start up, the economy, people wanting to keep it shut. Having it be a presidential election year certainly does not help in the calculation. So we have a number of things going on in 2020 that no one could have ever imagined. If someone were to have told you a year or two ago to look at a scenario for a pandemic type of an exercise. No one in their wildest imagination could have dreamt up what this COVID-19 has done to us. No one could have imagined it really would have shut the country down essentially, and had been so detrimental to our health, our safety, and business as we know it today. Zooming wasn't even thought of, I think, about a year or so ago, but now it's nomenclature that we use time and time again. So this is a sign that I took from the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association. And by the way, while this presentation was asked by the PR&LA organization, it certainly is germane to a number of sectors, a number of industries. Any business that deals with customers is likely to come across these kinds of issues. So some triggering events specific to the restaurant, lodging, or hotel industry. Customers may be upset over a number of things, and I'm not telling you anything new. It could be the room is not clean, the meal wasn't up to par, the fire alarm woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I want some compensation for my room rate. I've got hair in my soup. Why is the bill so high? I was quoted this amount. That sort of thing. Customer refuses to wear a mask is just the latest of a myriad of events that could trigger some potential hostile interaction between your frontline worker and a customer. These are just examples of recent headlines that I think kind of speak to where we are today. A man accused of firing shots outside of a cigar store following a mask dispute was apprehended. This happened to be in the Philadelphia area. A security guard's murder is among several confrontations over face coverings. I believe that was in Aurora, Colorado. A store worker pepper sprays a customer who allegedly got violent after refusing to wear a mask. So again, and this is just a very small sampling there. I'm sure you've heard of a number of other types of incidents that have occurred as a result of this. I was talking to Hope earlier before the webinar. I heard a radio talk show guy talking this morning about, we're talking about masks today, but if and when a vaccine does come out, is it a real stretch to imagine that government mandates that unless you have a certificate showing that you've been vaccinated, you're not allowed to walk into a public establishment or a private business type of thing? Again, that's not so hypothetical given that what we've experienced in 2020 so far dealing with masks. So mask regulations, over 40 states have enacted regulations or government mandated orders, governor's orders, if you will, that masks are to be worn at businesses. Social distancing, 6 feet apart, and so on. However, little of any guidance, in fact, I'm not sure that I'm aware of any guidance being provided to businesses as to how they are to enforce such government mandates or orders. And it really puts your frontline workers in an awkward situation. They're told to kind of balance between businesses normally, generally welcoming customers coming into their facility to do business, and yet enforcing public health orders. That's kind of a no-win situation. And we hope that today we'll navigate through some of these incidents and give you a little bit of information to go back to and better prepare your frontline workers to deal with these issues. So it's so critically important that you communicate to your employees their authority. To what extent are you empowering them to make a decision? What remedies do they have? What tools in their toolbox, if you will? The anti-masking customer walks in. What can your employee do to fix the problem, to nip it in the bud, not let it escalate to anywhere near a hostile interaction? Well, you as a company may have a policy to provide a mask to customers that don't have one. So a lot of hospitals, medical facilities nowadays, you go in for an appointment. If you don't have a mask, they just issue you a mask, they check your temperature, ask you a few questions, and allow you entry into their facility. Your frontline employee can politely and very calmly inform them that masks are government mandated and that masks are really for the safety of others, refuse them service as a last resort, or offer other options. So what other options can you offer them? It really depends on your creativity. So for example, and just to use an example outside of the Restaurant Lodging Association, I want to go in and buy a plumbing part from a plumbing supply store. Or I want to go and have a meal at a restaurant. I don't have a mask. Your policy is to not issue them a mask. You can refuse them service, or you can say, look, here's a telephone number to call. You can phone in an order. We'll be happy to make your order for you and walk it out to your car and give you that plumbing part, or giving you that lasagna or whatever it is you ordered. So offer them the option so that they recognize that, you're trying to be helpful. You're trying to be accommodating, notwithstanding the mask issue. You're trying to help the situation get remedied somehow. So how far are the owners and operators of the businesses willing to go? To what extent are they willing to empower their frontline workers with certain level of authority? So for example, a front desk clerk may be empowered to say, okay, if there's a certain issue with your room, or through no fault of your own, you're not happy with the quality or service, we'll knock $25 off your room rate. If that doesn't do it, then the employee is asked to contact a higher level management to authorize some other level of remediation. So again, make sure that level of empowerment, that level of authority, and the remedies that they have available to them is succinctly and clearly delineated to your employees. Don't put them in a situation where they feel like it's me against them. And if they yell, I'm going to yell even louder. And if they use profanity, that gives me a license to also use profanity. That's exactly what we want to try to avoid. So in Pennsylvania, at least, the Department of Health, there are some exemptions to mask wearing. And again, this is a fluid situation. So last I checked, this was essentially what the exemptions consisted of. You can be exempt from wearing a mask into a facility such as your business if you're a child under the age of 2. If you're an adult with a medical condition, and it's noteworthy that documentation is not required in this case. So if somebody walks in and says, I have a medical condition that prohibits me from wearing a mask, essentially you're going to have to accommodate that, accept that. We're going to look at a little bit of some legal issues that may address that as well, going further into the slides. People who are unable to wear a mask without any assistance are exempt. If wearing a mask poses a safety hazard while you're operating equipment or while you're at the workplace, or people needing to communicate with others that have a disability. So these are the 5 exemptions that I've seen, at least with Pennsylvania Department of Health, and I'm sure other states and CDC have certain other exemptions that may play into this as well. So again, the mantra for 2020 may be no mask, no shoes, no shirt, no service, and that in a nutshell is where we are today. So some legal and liability mask considerations for you to take into account. Certainly display a sign at the entry requiring masks to be worn. And as I mentioned earlier, you might also include in that sign that if they wish to call this number, you will try to accommodate them as best as you can. So for example, if they don't have a mask and you don't issue them a mask, they can call in an order and you'll do curbside delivery or whatever your policy happens to be. Offer them that option, but right up front, make it clear, if you're going to come into our facility, here's what the requirements are. And I really do advise that companies consult with legal advisors establishing your enforcement policy. And I'm going to really address some of that. It's really not your frontline workers who should be in the position of enforcing these kinds of policies. We'll talk a little bit further on that. So the employees are not to engage in any physical altercation, or verbal arguments resulting from the topics of masks. Per the Pennsylvania Department of Health, again, people are not required to show documentation that they meet an exception to wearing a mask, as I mentioned in the earlier slide. Now, a question I would pose for you to maybe ask your attorney is, should you ask that customer to sign a form stating that they meet one of the Pennsylvania Department of Health exceptions to wearing a mask? So essentially they're saying, hey, I meet one of the 5 exceptions or exemptions for wearing a mask, and you just see that they signed something like that. You don't ask for proof, but their signature merely puts the warm, fuzzy feeling in your mind that they're willing to put a signature to the extent that they show that they have a clear-cut exemption to the mask wearing. So what are the consequences? Customer refuses to wear a mask. It's pretty clear-cut. Allowing them to come in without a mask can subject your employees, to your customers, to harm. So you can potentially harm the health and safety of customers and employees. It can damage a company reputation or hurt your business. So imagine a headline that comes up in the next day that says, there's been an outbreak at XYZ restaurant, where 4 employees came down with tested positive for COVID-19. A number of customers also complained that having 2 or 3 days after visiting this restaurant, they came down with the symptoms of the COVID-19. What do you expect that to do to your business? People are not going to bust your doors down trying to come in and have a nice meal, knowing that there's a history there of COVID-19 positive cases. It certainly can result in citations, in liability. Did you take all the reasonable precautions to minimize the spread of the infection to employees and to customers? And now with nearly everyone having a smartphone, it's not a stretch for customers and employees to take photos and videos and sending them to government regulators, to law offices and what have you, to show proof that you're in violation of government orders. So it's pretty clear that not wearing a mask and allowing them to come in does have its consequences. So my recommendation is, again, you go back and you hold some employee workshops. Get your frontline workers together, get your managers together, work through various scenarios. Identify some possible remedies, the tools in the toolbox, as we mentioned. If this happens, then here's what we would expect you to do. What if a customer complains about another customer not wearing a mask and doesn't confront the customer, but confronts the front desk or confronts management? What are you going to do about it, type of thing? So you want to, during these workshops, establish management's expectations. If this and I'm not here, here's what I would expect you to do. Here's a reasonable response to this type of a scenario. And again, establish how much empowerment, how much authority you're granting to your frontline workers, so that there's very little left for guesswork. People kind of know, hey, I know what my management, we walked through this scenario, I know how to deal with this, I got this. And it kind of gives them the confidence to deal with it. So if a situation goes south, again, try to deal with your frontline worker in that situation. Ask the uninvolved or anger-directed parties to leave if it's safe to do so. And again, in some cases, when someone says, I want to talk to your supervisor, the implied message there is, I'm not getting through to you. You're not feeling me. So I want to talk to anybody else but you, because we're not connecting. So if there's a threat of violence, again, as I mentioned, use a prearranged word or phrase that coworkers know to summon help, to call for assistance. Again, pick that word or phrase that's not part of your nomenclature of that industry. Indicate that you're merely complying with company policy or government orders. I hate that we're even in this situation, but we are where we are, and we're trying to allow for as much protection for our customers and for our employees. Once the customer is informed of the mask policy and refuses to comply, very discreetly and nonchalantly go in the back and just call police if that's a situation. You know, if you have closed circuit TV coverage that may capture some of the goings on, that's certainly helpful, and as well as any form of documentation that that the police, for example, might ask you for. In responding to angry behavior, typically you don't want to stand any closer than 4 feet away with your hands open. Be receptive, be attentive, not on your hips, which gives them that authoritarian type of a body language, which could be seen as aggressive. If it's safe to do so, move to another area that's less disturbing to other customers. Speak in a civil manner and try to keep it calm, be respectful, create a relaxed environment. You know, don't try to escalate this any higher than it really has to be. Certainly don't try to physically remove a non-compliant customer. They should certainly not argue, attempt to apprehend, block customers from either entering or exiting a facility. And as I mentioned earlier, don't match them one for one in yelling or profanity. Without threatening, again, this very discreetly call the police and have them come in and kind of escalate it to the next level. It's not your job or the frontline workers' job to enforce such a government mandate. So the worst case, obviously violence erupts, items could be thrown, damage to business. You know, I think in the cigar shop scenario I talked about earlier, when the customer was told that he couldn't come into the business without wearing a mask, I think he stole 2 or 3 cigars and walked away. And that's when the worker followed the customer outside the establishment and things really went south. So the police may be called, the person may be arrested. You know, that's really that's really the worst case type of outcome, and hopefully not violence to either your employee or to the customer. So potential attackers at the workplace, these are potential assailants, if you will, that may want to come back to the workplace to retaliate either against an employee in particular or the company in general. They're just not happy with how they were treated. You know, and along those lines, it could be a contentious employee termination, for example, a customer that was told to not come back. So the scenario we just played out earlier, you call the police and let's say you file a defiant trespass order against this individual to never come back to your facility. Individuals with a PFA may be filed against them by an employee, a protection from abuse order. Now, what's important here is to be able to have your frontline worker recognize a banned individual, you know, one of the ones that we just talked about in the previous slide. If they attempt to come back into the workplace, what is their motive? You know, do they want to come in to do harm in retaliation for what they perceive to be unfairly being treated, being embarrassed, or whatever their motivation happens to be? More importantly, can your frontline workers recognize that this is an individual that was previously banned from entering? In some cases, you know, if you happen to have a closed circuit TV camera or some other form of video or photo of the person, you may want to have that as a hot link on your PC, maybe at the front desk or as your receptionist. Can your frontline worker quickly summon assistance? Maybe a panic alarm, or you push some sort of a button at the front desk or at the as the hostess to alert someone that, hey, a banned individual is trying to enter the facility. I'm not sure what the motivation is, but he was clearly told to not come back into the facility. Things may not go well, type of thing. So leaning forward type of thing. You want to be able to have your people front line recognize that this is an individual who was told to never come back in. Workplace parking. I put this slide in because if somebody is thrown out of your establishment, they may know what time you start your job, what time you leave your job, what kind of car you drive, and the parking situation, whether it's a parking lot or a garage, is especially vulnerable for a potential attack. So it makes sense to kind of look at it and put some additional protective measures in addressing the parking lot or parking garages. We get into civil unrest. In this next part of the presentation, unfortunately, we're seeing a number of cities in a number of states where this has really gotten completely out of hand. So I wanted to address a little bit of this to put your business at least in the mindset of, do you have a plan to address civil unrest? Are your employees trained to respond accordingly and not to let it escalate? So first of all, who are they and who are they not? An outraged citizen peacefully protesting an issue is not considered civil unrest, and for all intents and purposes for this presentation, are excluded from what we're going to be addressing. The majority of protests don't involve civil unrest. If it's an issue with raising of taxes or opposing eminent domain or whatever happens to be the topic of du jour, they have every right to protest peacefully and let their feelings be known to their elected officials as to where they're coming from. However, other components, especially in recent months, have joined these protesters, and they may include anarchists that whose sole purpose may be to disrupt society, anti-government sentiment, and looters / criminals that are opportunistic. Hey, this is a great time to come in and get my stereo or buy whatever I want to buy that I can't afford because the doors to the business is open. People are putting it on fire. I might as well walk in and walk out with a decent clothes and some other sneakers and whatever it happens to be, because that opportunity presents itself. So anarchists, they may hijack a legitimate protest, which makes it harder for elected officials to differentiate between anarchists and peaceful protesters. And law enforcement, basically, it's going to be harder for law enforcement to use force, even if they riot and loot, because now it looks as if, do we allow them to peacefully protest when only a handful are doing the rioting and looting? So in some cases, cities and states are just letting it go and basically hamstringing the police officers to doing their job. It may be that they just oppose capitalism. They oppose a democratic process. They oppose government to the point where they condone violence. They may even incite protesters to join in the destruction, or they get all worked up in that whole process where what would have been a peaceful protester just gets all excited in this whole process and just joins their what they deem to be fellow protesters, but in sense are really anarchists. And as I mentioned, looters are just opportunistic groups taking advantage of that situation. There's lesser likelihood for them to get caught because there's just mayhem going on out there. And wearing the mask makes it even harder for law enforcement to identify them a day or 2 or 3 days later. So the strategy for civil unrest, a little bit different from the anti-maskers. Engaging in civil discourse is not recommended. These rioters and looters and anarchists are not really there to exchange meaningful dialogue. They're not here to hear your ideology and explain their ideology and hope to convert you. They're really there to make a statement, to get their 15 minutes of fame, and they're fully committed to employing violence and destroying property to get that 15 minutes of fame, even better coverage on the news. So protection of your employees and your customers should be the highest priority. Time permitting, lock the doors, evacuate if it can be done safely. If not, the employees and customers should hide out in a safe area that's already arranged in advance, and call 911 when it's safe to do so. The probability of occurrence, obviously, the issue of anarchy and looters and rioters. Whenever there's an increase in contentious issues, increase in stressors, racial, political tensions. If you're in close proximity to a high target facility, and I give you examples of what that might consist of, maybe a federal building, iconic statues and landmarks, the downtown districts, sporting complex, anything that has some recognition that may even attract national news coverage, certainly would increase that level of that probability of this type of situation occurring. My recommendation is you maintain situational awareness. Kind of keep your finger on the pulse of those contentious issues, the potential protests. Have permits been filed in or around your neighborhood? Monitor news and social media. Again, leaning forward, look for signs. Are there signs indicating anarchists are in the area? Is there graffiti which is specific to a certain group showing up in and around your business facility? You might even contact the police for advice on what the groups that have filed a permit, what are they expected to do? Is there a likelihood, a higher than average likelihood for violence? You want to gauge that potential for violence. What has this group who's filed this permit done in the past? What's happened to other nearby neighborhoods? Coordinate with neighboring businesses. Keep everybody on the same sheet, if you will. There's one website that I like to refer to, nextdoor.com. And it really doesn't matter whether it's your housing development or your business downtown district, for example. You're all kind of on the same website exchanging information. And it could be everything from, hey, we're having a yard sale this weekend, to there's been people spreading around $20 counterfeit bills. Or we've had issues with rioters, flash mobs coming in and stealing things. Keep yourselves kind of in the loop. And this is just one example of a website, but whether you want to meet in person or do a Zoom platform or get on this website to exchange information, maintaining that situational awareness, I think, is so critical so that you're not caught flat-footed and have to respond in an ad hoc manner, but you've been given some warning, and now at least you can decide on what to do. And part of your planning process, again, first and foremost, consider the safety of your workers and customers. Allow for a safe room or safe area. Is there a secondary means of escape? You can always recover property and inventory, but you aren't going to recover the loss of life. Consider protective measures if you remain open. Again, maybe have your workers report to work in casual clothes and not wearing their business uniform or business identified clothing. Something that says, XYZ restaurant or whatever, so that they're less likely to be addressed and attacked as they're walking into the facility. Train your employees on the plan. Here's the to-dos and what not to do. Time permitting, safeguard your valuables, lock up your doors, board up the exterior, make sure your CCTV coverage is working, the resolution is fine, cobwebs are cleared of your lenses. Ensure all the exits have quick release features. These are all good protective, proactive measures that you might want to think about well in advance of having the threat of civil unrest showing up in your neighborhood. And some of the details which your plan should certainly address is the communications and personnel accountability, provide for the evacuation or to go into safe areas, develop trigger points. At what point do you decide to not open up your business? How large the threat must show up before you decide, hey, we're not even going to open. We're going to just take it in as conservative a manner. We're not even going to open up. We'll contact the employees. Maybe you'll update your website so customers will know what your position is with business. The customers will look for guidance from businesses. So a clear-cut example of that might be if you're in a restaurant and there's an active shooter, for example, the customers, just by their very nature, human nature being the way it is, their only escape path out is the door that they came in from, not knowing that 5 or 10 feet away is a door outside from the kitchen area as opposed to walking 30 feet through the main door that they walked into. so your employees can guide some of these customers out, in the closest exits, and they're going to take your direction and guidance. So they're going to look for employee frontline workers for where should I go, what should I do type of thing. Here's a safe area, here's the closest exit out. Provide for first aid if it can be done safely, and certainly contact police. And this isn't anything new. This is the typical, if you're in the Portland, Oregon, New York City, Chicago, Missouri, that's what some of these store owners have unfortunately had to do to try and protect property as best they could. And even that was no guarantee that they wouldn't tear off the plywood and still make their way into the facility and burn it down. Insurance coverage. So check with your insurance company, your insurance carrier, on your limits, your terms, your exclusions. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes you asking those questions. It may not come up in the conversation between you and your agent. Look at business interruption. What's covered, what's not covered. Civil unrest, property damage, arson, looting. Do you have coverage, for example, where there's no damage, no property damage to your facility, but there's an inability to access your facility, so you have to close your business down? Is that specifically in your policy? Is an act of terrorism something that you might have waived because it's a lower premium, because you never thought, and honestly, up until 2020, why would you have, that there's a threat of an act of terrorism on my little business in this little podunk neighborhood? Nobody's going to be addressing it. When you talk about act of terrorism, you're thinking ISIS, you're thinking, something on a larger scale. And certainly take photos and videos of valuables in the interior, the exterior of the business, before any civil unrest rears its ugly head, so you can go back to your insurance company and show what you had. So in summary, again, a customer refuses to wear a mask. Diffuse the potentially violent situation, diffuse it, nip it in the bud, keep your frontline workers being calm and reasonable. Don't engage in any physical or verbal battles. It's not their job to physically or verbally enforce government mandated types of orders. Know when to call for help. Lean forward. We mentioned everything from identifying recognizing the banned individuals, anything from panic alarms, having the code word where a coworker will recognize that what you're telling them is call help. I don't know where this is going. I don't feel comfortable about this. For civil unrest issues, don't engage in any dialogue. Protect your employees and customers. Put together a plan, and essentially it's lock up, evacuate, hide out. And when it's safe to do so, call 911. And hope this is really the end of the presentation. I'll open it up to any questions that you might have, and we'll try and keep it to the 1 hour time frame so we can get back to work.
Thank you, George, very much. We did have one question come in. They were asking how to help your staff to use these de-escalation strategies first when their first inclination is to call the police right away. Like how to help your staff work through these steps first. Do you have any tips or?
Well, first and foremost, you're in business to be welcoming to customers. So first and foremost, your nature, the frontline worker's nature, should be welcoming, calming. Hey, come on in and escape the mayhem of the outside world, and come on in and relax. Enjoy a meal or enjoy your stay at our hotel, or let us give us the opportunity to provide the quality and the service that you've been accustomed to having from us. So that should be first and foremost in the employee's mind. If a situation such as masks happen to come up, it's taken a playbook from that calmness, from that welcoming, nurturing environment, and just kind of work your way through the scenario as best as you can to try and establish a mutually agreeable remedy. So we don't want to turn you away. We certainly don't want to harm our employees and customers. So where's the happy medium? What can we do to try to accommodate you in light of this issue? I think that if you instill that in your frontline workers, I think that's so important for you as the owner or operator of your business to kind of have that as a second nature response. It should not be an aggressive, hey, this is the policy, and I'm gonna kind of enforce that. It could also be malicious compliance. The sign says no mask, and by God, I'm not going to let anybody in without a mask, and that's it. I draw the line, and that's really not the nature of owning a business. Certainly no good reputable business owner would want your frontline workers to establish that hard-nosed sentiment.
Okay. And I think to build on something you had said earlier too is, if as a manager setting the expectation is, for the employees on what you're looking for them, like their authority levels too.
Absolutely. The empowerment of your employees is so important. The first time your employee finds out, well, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know you would have allowed me to do that. I thought you'd be upset with me if I did that. That should come out in workshops and dialogues and discussions. Okay, well, thanks, boss. Now I know that I can do that type of thing. But sometimes it's stepping outside the box. It's that employee that says, all right, let me use my imagination. He wants to come in and buy this. He doesn't have a mask. We don't offer him a mask. What else can I do to still make both parties happy without getting anybody upset? And that's the kind of employee you really want. That's the ideal employee.
So we had another question about masks. So how to handle a guest wearing a full face mask, something like a scary Halloween or gas mask that could feel threatening to employees or guests. Like how to handle if the mask is threatening or not appropriate, I guess would be another way to say it too.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's kind of a new one. I would hope that you wouldn't run across too many of these situations, as people wearing regular masks find it invasive enough. I mean, you might want to politely just say that it's scaring other customers. Would you mind please taking that off? And here's a face mask, a regular face mask that you might wear in its place. Again, it is dealing with it in as cordial and as friendly a manner as possible initially. I guess technically, wearing a mask like that still meets the government orders, so the enforcement aspect may not be appropriate.
Sure. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? I know there was a question about the recording, and we will be sharing this recording with all of you that are on the call and on our website. Okay, we have what are your recommendations for people with intellectual disabilities? And are you saying the individuals that are their customers? Yeah. So do you have any recommendations for people with intellectual disabilities?
Well, I mean, if they certainly meet the exemption of wearing a mask, then again, you'd have to allow them entry without that mask. And as I mentioned earlier, even if somebody just comes in and says, I meet the exemption requirements of the Pennsylvania Department of Health, you are not required of them to show you proof that they do that. I pose that question that you might want to discuss with your legal advisors. Should you have them sign something that says, I sign that I meet one of the exemptions to mask wearing? If somebody has an intellectual issue or mental issue, mentally impaired, if you will, and a mask would essentially cause them a lot of harm and despair, that to me would would meet the exemption requirement, and they would not have to wear a mask. But again, take that up with your lawyer or legal advisors to to make sure that that meets the exemption in and of itself. I believe that it would.
Great, and you're getting some thank yous, and that this was very helpful, and that they're happy that, you know, we put this together, and you know, what you have given, the information that you've given has been very helpful. I think you had a last page with your contact information. If anybody wanted to reach out to you with any questions, would that be all right?
Yeah, in fact, here's a closing slide that,
Oh,
so where do you go from here? You know, we've talked about a lot of things about mask wearing and civil unrest. You know, the takeaway is do some planning, gather advice from legal, talk to your insurance carrier, empower and train your employees on what to do, probably more importantly, what not to do. And frontline workers' initial actions really can make all the difference in the outcome. So go back and kind of look at it from a different perspective. And here is my point of contact, my email and phone number to contact me if someone's interested in some additional services or work. Again, it's this was provided to the Pennsylvania Restaurant and Lodging Association at no cost through the courtesy of the South Central Pennsylvania Task Force.
thank you so much, George, and we really appreciate you putting this together and taking the time to present to our group, because I know this is, like you said, it's very relevant and timely with where we are in the world right now.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Again, just to remind everybody, we will be providing a link to the recording. We will have this on our website, and we do have additional de-escalation resources on our website that may be helpful for you to take back, like George said, and develop training plans and hold some weekly workshops with your employees so that everybody's on the same page when you start your work weeks. With that said, wait, one more question, George, really quick. If a guest has a medical condition that prevents them from wearing a mask, they shouldn't be going out to dinner. Oh, okay. It was just a comment. I'm sorry. So I appreciate everybody joining us today. George, again, thank you so much for this. And I think with that, we will be ending our presentation today. And I hope everybody has a good rest of the week. And please stay safe.